To What Purpose a Leaf, Part 2, continuation of taped interview from December 14th, 1973. Alex Harsley and A.D. Coleman. Harsley, do you write to a specific audience? Suppose you were covering the work of black photographers compared with white photographers. Would you approach it on the same level? I think I write to specific audiences in terms of the publications I'm writing for. That is, I've got a sense of who reads each publication. Whether or not that's an accurate sense is another question. There's some kind of image in my head as to what the readership is of the Times, some kind of image in my head as to what the readership is of the Voice. And so I relate to it in terms of tone of the piece, in terms of what I felt or would be legitimate references outside photography. The people at the Voice, for example, would have a kind of familiarity with avant-garde theater, certain kinds of avant-garde theater and avant-garde films, etc., that I can refer to without feeling like I have to necessarily explain it. Harsley, but the Voice is no longer there. Coleman, yeah, the Voice is no longer there. Otherwise, I don't write in terms of a particular person's work as reviewing a particular person's work. I don't write to a particular audience that way, even in the case of a black photographer or a third world photographer. I'm writing essentially to those same people who I feel are reading me, whoever they may be, at each particular publication. Is there a format that you use today similar to the Voice, or are you focusing everything toward different areas? Well, at this point, what I'm doing is I'm beginning to try and feel out the possibility of longer articles, which in one way or another may be centered around a theme, but aren't specifically tied to a specific show or one particular person's body of work. For example, there's a piece I want to do on an area which I call photobiography, which is people one or another doing self-portrait, or as an extended body of work, or people who are using the snapshot family album format as a form of autobiography, which I find is becoming a very prevalent mode, both in what we think of as photography and also in the arts. There's a lot of this work shown, say, in some of the Soho galleries. Harsley, I'm concerned with the artist who has worked out and beyond that particular mode of doing things. You mentioned the avant-garde artist as when you were writing for The Voice. Have you forsaken that particular area of the arts to actually do what you're doing now? Coleman, I'm not sure I follow you. Harsley, there's a particular art form coming into existence on a grassroots level. There's all kinds of things being done photographically. What has happened to that art? The things that they are doing is no longer communicated. Only various conservative areas of the photographic medium is being communicated. Coleman, I'm still not sure that I know exactly what you mean by conservative. Harsley, a whole breed of artists have been forced out of the art scene. They are no longer being recognized, whereas in The Voice they were. It provided a forum to give the other artists an idea of what people within their same area of thought were doing on a particular level. No longer is that line of communications there. The artists are still creating things, but they are creating things within their own little sphere of thought. They no longer interrelated with each other as they formerly were. Coleman, and you're saying that this has something specifically to do with the Voice column? I know what you're talking about. Certainly, when I first started to write for The Voice, I really did feel proud of the fact that the column served as a switchboard in some way, that almost everything that was being shown in town and most of what was being published would or could be discussed during its run so that people would have a chance to function that way. That certainly can't be done at the Times. There's no way the Times column can be like that, just for the space limitations, for one thing. I found recently that, for example, I wrote a piece on censorship for the Times. And for what I was trying to do, I had too many ideas for the kind of space I had. And the piece came out, I kind of approached the subject, I came out the other side as a weak angle. I'm not sure that it was effective. And I began to realize that maybe in a certain way, I couldn't be the switchboard anymore. I don't have the vehicle to function as a switchboard per se, in the sense of plugging people into the specific work as it's being done. What I can maybe do at this point is to provide some overviews. That's why I mentioned this piece on photobiography. This is an area that I feel a lot of people are going into, Harsley. You will enhance that area even more by writing about it. But what I'm saying is there are other artists who have been through that particular area of thought. What about them? Coleman. If I find some way of encompassing what they're doing, if I find in some way to tie in, what I was saying really was that I'm in a position now that there's only a limited number of shows per se that I can review because of the formats that I have for writing it. Harsley. So what makes you write about these shows? Is there an assignment that is passed down? Do you get an assignment? Coleman. Partly it's a request from the Times. They want certain things definitely covered. They want any shows at the Museum of Modern Art covered. They want any show at the Met covered. I got a call today from a guy there asking me to make sure that the Dos Mundos show, the Puerto Rican photography show at the Cultural Center, was covered. And as it happens, Gene Thornton and I had already worked it out. He was going to cover it because it fell within his week. Harsley. That personifies what I'm talking about. That's what I'm trying to get to. Only established institutions are being supported today, but the other art organizations are no longer supported. Now, is that a direction for the future? Coleman. That's simply the fact of the situation with the Times, which I can certainly stretch as much as I can. I do try periodically to cover exposure. I try to cover offbeat shows. But the Times, for better or for worse, is the paper of record. They do, for better or for worse, feel that it's incumbent to cover major shows. I can't say I disagree with them in the sense that these are the shows that are going to be seen by the largest number of people. Therefore, these are the ones that are going to shape people's understanding more than, say, a storefront show. Even though the work in a storefront show, in many cases viewed side by side with work in a museum shows, might prove to be qualitatively better. There's no way. I think it would be foolish of any of us to expect that the Times suddenly, in the area of photography, is going to decide that it is the avant-garde, the forum for the most avant-garde, and off-the-beaten-track work in that sense. If there were a lot of coverage of photography in the Times, it would be different. They've got a lot of coverage of the theater. They cover theater on a daily basis, not just a weekly basis. And so Walter Kerr can go slumming, come down to the East Village, see something off Broadway if he wants to, and can write about it now and then. That's not really an option open to Thornton and myself. We've got a lot of stuff to cover, and we've only got that one place, and it's a very limited space. It's not even the kind of space that Walter Kerr has. And it becomes a problematic kind of situation. The Times is not the vehicle for that. The Times is a paper of record, and it is a place where, Harsley, that's important in the level that you're putting. It is the medium of the record, which is for tomorrow. The Times is the record of today's culture, which will affect tomorrow's minds. Don't you see something awfully wrong with that? Coleman. Well, I'm not sure how wrong it is. I think it's that, let's put it another way. The largest audience for photography, one institution which attracts the most members of the public to see its work, is the Museum of Art. You may like that or not. You may agree with John Zarkowski's vision of photography, which is that photography is documentary and anything beyond that is not photography. You may disagree, but nevertheless it is the most influential institution in New York for photographic exhibitions. Exposure Gallery is not, for example, a tremendously influential place. The audience that comes to see work there is very small. The Underground Gallery has a very small audience. The effect of those two galleries on the public for photography, the audience for photography, is minimal compared to the effect of the Museum of Modern Art. Now, I realize that what you're saying is that there's a situation of, I don't know what to call it, but some like snowballing effect maybe, where the fact that the Museum of Modern Art is a large institution, gets a large audience, amplified by the fact that because it has a large audience, it's covered by the Times. I certainly agree with that as a syndrome. But I don't think that the answer is to say, well, then the Times should be covering exposure rather than the Museum of Modern Art. What I'm saying is that the places which have smaller audiences should be covered in newspapers or magazines which also have smaller audiences, which do not function in the same sense as the paper of record. Harsley, you're discriminating and categorizing things when they exist as a whole. Coleman, if I find work that is dynamite any place at all, I feel free to write about it in the Times. Harsley, but it doesn't seem as though you're exercising that leeway. Coleman, I haven't seen much work that's dynamite any place. I'll tell you frankly, not even at the Modern. Harsley, maybe you've changed. Coleman, maybe I have. That's possible, you know. I mean, I'm not seeing work that excites me tremendously on the positive side very much. Now, obviously, my taste has become somewhat A, jaded, and B, sophisticated over the past 5 years, and there's no way for that not to be true. I know that a lot of work that I'm seeing now, which I would when I first started out have viewed as, let's say, professional work. I mean, I don't mean professional commercial, but professional in terms of someone who is a committed art photographer. Now it seems to me to be student work in the sense that I've gotten more of an idea for myself now of what can be accomplished by someone who's been committed and working for a period of time. And when I see work that in one way or another doesn't come up to that standard, very often it doesn't seem to me to be worth discussing. At one time, I could discuss it because I didn't have that differential. I think to an extent that happens with any critic, that when you start out, you're very open to everything, and you sort of don't have, or ideally you're very open to everything. You don't have quality standards in that sense because you haven't experienced that much stuff. Harsley, that's the problem. Coleman, but as you go on and begin experiencing more and more stuff, you just kind of automatically weed out a lot of things because essentially you've said what you already had to say about work at that level. Even if you haven't said it about this particular person's work, you've already said what you have to say about, let's say, the first show of the graduate portfolio of somebody who just got out of Pratt. The first time that I saw a show like that, I had something to say, and maybe the 5th time I saw a show like that, I had something to say, but the 10th time I see the first show of somebody's graduate portfolio from Pratt, man, I know what that work looks like. I walk into the gallery and I know what school the guy comes from. I know whether he studied predominantly with Purkis or Fried. You know, Harsley. But you're saying a lot of things in that thought. That is, I mean, it is so important. Coleman, well, bring it out. I'm not aware. Maybe we should talk about this. Harsley. You understand things because you have been educated. There are a lot of people who don't have your education. They haven't gone through as many things as you have gone through. Now, when you attain a certain wisdom, you have to, look at and understand things as a whole. But your wisdom is like a personal triumph for you. What happens on the beginning level is no longer of any importance to you because, well, you first of all don't have to go to it to understand it anymore, so you don't write about it. But what about the other person who's starting out like you? So where does that leave the arts if everyone has to approach it on that level? Coleman, well, the problem is, and we keep getting back to the same thing every time we talk. The problem is there's just me and Gene here in New York, and that to me is a real problem because what I'm trying to say, Alex, is that this is an inevitable process that happens, right? I can't anymore go in and see the first show of a student for Pratt, and I don't mean to single Pratt out, name your school, and have anything of interest to the readers to say about that work because I've already said things about that work. Now, I might have something of interest to say to the photographer about that work, so follow me out for a few minutes. I might have something of interest to say to the photographer about that work. He might certainly want to know my response to the work, but my obligations are twofold. One is certainly to the photographer, the other is to the audience, and if all I can say about a body of work is essentially the same thing that I said about the last body of similar work there, and I don't have any new insights and so on, then I'm not doing anybody a favor except the photographer by writing that. Now, from my standpoint, I'm boring myself by rewriting something I've already said. I'm boring my reader by making them read again something I've already said about somebody else and just changing the names, essentially. And what I guess I'm trying to say is that there is a level where a lot of the work that I'm seeing now, there's a lot more work coming out now, and I think a lot of people are showing very prematurely. And I think as a result of that, we're seeing a lot of work which I respond to more as an educator, more as a teacher than as a critic. You follow the difference? If I was this student's portfolio, there might be things that I would have to say to him about the importance of going on and individuating his vision, about the act that he's very obviously imitating the people he's studied with and the people who he was told were good, and he's trapped in other people's values, value systems, and tastes patterns. And then he's got to spend some time just being a person on his own out in the world and coming to define his own vision more clearly before he shows his work. But that's a teacherly function. You dig what I'm saying? There's not a critical function, or at least you don't want to do it 50 times. And I can understand that every photographer wants to have it individualized to him, wants to have that thing stated to him personally when he puts his work up on the wall, but you can't do that, man. You can't do that as a writer. That's not the function of the critic. I mean, like, you know, there's a process that an artist goes through, that any kind of creative intelligence goes through, where there's a kind of watershed period where you've got to sit and do your work in private, I think. And you've got to just let your work grow and maybe not show it for quite a while until you know what you're about. I think there's a lot of people in photography who are showing very, very prematurely. You know, when I can go to about 90% of the shows, man, and I know what it's going to be, it's going to be an instance in the past. Exhibition space for beginners was quite limited. I wasn't allowed to participate in an exhibit by the urban photographers at the New School for Social Research because I'm not well known. I decided to seek out other photographers with the same problem with the hope of establishing a place to show our works as a group, said Harsley. No, this isn't the same article. Page 2.
On the next page, on the other side.
On the other side. It's going to be, oh yeah, up there. I think there's a lot of people in photography who are showing very, very prematurely. You know, when I can go to about 90% of the shows, man, and I know what's going to be. It's going to be a little-known photographers and serving as a center for those seriously interested in photography as an art. Nope, that's not it either. Is that on the last page? Or in the next one?
Probably the next one. Here it is. Is that it?
Yeah. Okay, after that little break, to what purpose a leaf, part 4, continuation of taped interview, December 14th, 1973, Alex Harsley and A.B. Coleman. Harsley. Well, I'm in touch with a lot of photographers who are doing some rather interesting things. Now, they've actually gone deeper into what they were doing originally. They have a vehicle and something to work towards, mainly exhibiting. So exhibiting is a functional part of photographic artists. They have something to work towards and eventually show it. But if they can't take their work to the public to get an on-the-spot response to see how they can communicate better with the public, and then go back and put the necessary pieces in and to continue to do it that way. Coleman. But who's stopping them? No one's stopping them from taking to the public. Harsley. But by not writing about that particular area of the photographic arts means that those particular artists are no longer able to communicate on a larger scale to a larger audience. Coleman. Man, I would throw this right back in your lap the same way I do every time you bring this up to me, and I would say why isn't there a photo column in the Village Voice? It's 8 months since I left the Village Voice, man. Why hasn't the fucking photographic community started petitions to get that space back? That's their space. Harsley, well, that's an apathy that has built up. Coleman, well, then don't come to me. It's not my fault. Harsley, wait a minute. Coleman, I didn't build that apathy, man. I've done 5 years of work. I've done 5 years of work to fight that apathy. Don't put it on me, Alex. You're trying to put it on me, and I repeat what I said to you the last discussion we had. I do as much as I fucking well can within my life and within my own needs for, like, a little happiness, a little peace and quiet, a little tranquility. I do as much as I fucking well can to make people aware of photography as a creative medium and to get all kinds of ideas about photography into as many different kinds of publications as I can get them into. I spent literally 2 years off and on writing a history of photography for the Columbia Encyclopedia, for the new edition of the Columbia Encyclopedia. So there'd be something in there that wasn't simply a list of facts and figures chronologically arranged, names and dates that, man, if someone who doesn't know anything about photography opens the new Columbia Encyclopedia when it comes out looking to find out what happened to photography, at least have a sense that there was a development there, that there's not just a chemical, interaction reviewing a couple of people's shows. I make my own decisions here. I pull certain options, I don't pull others, and so on. But, I can't do that anymore. I can't be the innocent I once was and walk into a gallery and write about somebody's dead bird photographs as though I haven't seen 500 dead bird photographs. It's just not that way anymore. Harsley. We all speak a common language, which is the English language. It has undergone many changes within the past 100 years, right? But still, the foundation is there, and it's taught in the schools, regardless of what slangs and slurs have been added to it. And even that, after a period of time, becomes a part of the language. So you speak in terms of the dead bird. Okay, the dead bird can be used once, twice, 3 times, 5 times, the same way as words. Coleman, sure. Harsley, now, it's according to how you're able to put the pieces together so that you actually describe a particular sequence of events to a person. It's the same thing with an ordinary situation that a photographer photographed 1,000 times over. He learns from what the other person is doing, and he continues with it, expands it even more. Coleman, sure, granted. Harsley, but you're not covering this evolution anymore. Coleman, the point I'm trying to make, man, is that you can't keep covering that evolution. You can cover it once in terms of development as a critic, in terms of your coming to understand this evolution. Harsley, but the world is constantly... Coleman, after that it becomes... Yeah, but it's also constantly cynical. It's constantly like you begin to see the same kinds of pictures coming out from people. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of premature exhibiting going on. There's a lot of people whose work I could only react as though I were a teacher, not as a critic, because I've got nothing to say about it critically. Harsley, you speak in terms of cycles. Today is 1973. The cycle has begun. Okay. 1974. When you came into photography, you came into a new cycle. The cycle is no longer young to you. It's an old cycle. New people are coming into. Coleman, it's still... No, dig it. It's still a cycle. The cycle itself is interesting to me, friend. Harsley, wait a minute. Photography is, to you, a broad area. Photography to a lot of other people, now hold on, it's a very small area. To a lot of people who are coming into it. When you came into photography, there were other people in that time writing about photography. It wasn't as large as it is now. It's larger than the world it's larger than the world that you are writing about now today on a comparative level as to when you came into photography. Sure. So therefore, there's more to be written about, and I am writing about them, because it is multiplied, multifold now. It's not specific areas of thought. I mean, things people are doing. Documentary. Okay, now you can begin to categorize different areas of the photographic arts. I mean, definite categorizations all along the way. Now, something or another, I don't know how you arbitrarily pick these different categories, and the categories say, like within the past year, was the early period of photography. It was important actually to build up that area of photography to show that it's been around for a long time. It's gone to such and such a place. But this, in a way, made the other areas that had been growing very small comparatively. In fact, some have been completely overlooked. If you draw a graph, they would be hardly visible. But much money, effort, and publicity has been put into this area that you write about. Now you talk in terms, well, there's a new area of photography coming into blossom, but it was always there. It was just a matter, Coleman. Yeah. I'm not saying that it's a new area. I'm saying that it's an area that I'm interested in examining now as an overview. Previously, I wasn't in a position to have an overview, hardly. Now what I'm saying in essence is that, what about the other areas of photography? Coleman. Listen, man, you don't expect Walter Kerr to go out and review the Yale Student Drama Group or even the Yale Graduate Student Drama Group or even somebody's first play. Walter Kerr's a bad example, Harsley, but I don't see you. Coleman, I'm not trying to set myself up as a grand old man, Harsley, but I don't see you. Coleman, what I'm saying is that the critic evolves, and that I happen to be in the unfortunate position of being the only fucking critic, or one of two fucking critics in New York, dealing with photography on a regular basis. So you come to me, Alex, and you're fetching at me. Harsley. But to me, you are A.D. Coleman. You are a product of the 60s, the generation of the 60s. Coleman, absolutely. I'm not trying to say Harsley. And to me, that generation of the 60s is selling out to the 70s. The very thing that they were trying to overcome during the 60s, they are becoming a part of in the 70s, mainly per establishment, per established way of thinking, not really creative. Coleman, well, I don't think you're being entirely fair. Even though that's to Harsley. Well, I have to be, Coleman, to some extent, quite possibly true, and quite possibly even inevitable that things do change. People do change. And that, in one way or another, I guess we all do become to some extent more conservative by virtue of the fact that we can't possibly move as fast as the times. But I certainly don't think I've become fond of the Museum of Modern Art. I don't think I'm linked in that way with the Museum of Modern Art, that I am suddenly hobnobbing or anything like that. And I think that's what you're saying, what you're implying, and I don't think it's fair. I have very deep antagonisms towards what John Zarkowski represents, as you've seen if you've read the last piece I wrote in Popular Photography about their new acquisition show this summer, as you'll see this Sunday in the piece that I wrote about the current show up there by William Vane, and as you'll see when I come to review Zarkowski's book. I have very deep opposition to a lot of things that he represents, just the attitudes. I don't just mean his taste. His taste I don't care about, that's his taste. But his imposition of his taste as an aesthetic, I do care about, and Harsley. So what you're saying is a carryover from the 60s, you have become more sophisticated in your approach to the overall problem. Coleman, what I'm saying is that it seems to be necessary for me in the position that I'm in. For example, when I first started writing for The Voice, I couldn't have written the piece that I wrote about Minor White. It would have been utterly out of line. It would have been paid no attention to. It would have had no effect. But it seems as though you, Harsley, but it seems as though you are approaching things as an inner person, and that inner person is no longer part of your audience. You know, you're writing things straightforward from your inner self, things that you feel strongly about, without any regard to inner self, things that you feel strongly about without any regard to the other person's way of thinking and what they are into and what they would like to see written about and what they would like to read. Coleman. Well, that's never been a concern of mine. I mean, what other people would like to read hasn't been a concern of mine. I write what I feel is important to write. I presume that other people want to read it on the basis that I'm employed for writing it, and I presume that if it didn't meet somebody's taste pattern, that I wouldn't be employed for writing it, because who would want it? There are a lot of writers around, but I've never set out in that sense to gear myself towards what people wanted to hear. And I can't gear myself anymore towards being or even pretending to be the kind of writer I was back when I started out on The Voice, where I had an infinitely expandable space. I could write about any kind of thing I wanted to write about. There was no one making any kind of suggestion, even to what I should cover or not cover. Harsley. That's what I'm trying to get around to now. Coleman. Where are the others? What I'm saying is that in the development of the media, Harsley, it doesn't matter how many other people. Alex, yes, it does matter how many other people. Harsley, like you can be the only person that's writing. Coleman, I'm entitled to evolve as the kind of writer that I want. Harsley, when you started out, you were the writer that you wanted to be, correct? And I say that you are no longer the writer you want to be. You've fallen under the dictates of other people's ideologies. Coleman, no, I'm not tied to John Zarkowski's aesthetic at all. And as I was starting to say, Harsley, you still fall to the dictates of what he does, whatever he does. Coleman, because I begin to see at this point, which I didn't realize back then, which I didn't realize when I first started out, I begin to understand now that what John Zarkowski does very profoundly affects the media, man. Because people read his books, people go to the Museum of Modern Art, and that's what tells them what photography is. He who controls the definitions controls the structure of society. Stokely Carmichael said that. Harsley, okay, why don't people go to... Wait a minute now. Coleman, hold on. Let me finish the thought here. John Zarkowski is one of the people who controls the definitions of photography. Peter Burnell is another. Minor White is another. These are people in a position, Harsley. The only main reason they're able to control is because they are given a forum to stand on, to project whatever thought they want to project in any manner they want to project it. The other person has no forum at all, no voice, even if they establish their own. To be continued. To what purpose a leaf? Part 5, continuation of taped interview, December 14th, 1973, Alex Harsley and A.D. Coleman. Coleman. The only main reason why they are able to control is because they are given a forum to stand on, to project whatever thought they want to project in any manner they want to project it. The other person has no forum at all, no voice. Even if they establish their own. Harsley, how's the other person around the corner to know about it? This other person around the corner has been forced into the same position. Person around the other corner forced into the same position. Whereas some persons way up in the sky, overlooking it all, feeding the material into them. Coleman, I throw it right back at you, man. I throw it right back at you. This is not something that I can be doing now in the spaces to which I have access for my writing. It's not something that I can be doing. It's not appropriate to those spaces. It's appropriate to another kind of space. It was very appropriate to the space in the voice particularly, and functioned as a switchboard. I was very proud of the way it functioned as a switchboard during the period I ran it. But man, after a while, you can get exhausted running a fucking switchboard. And not only exhausted, but bored. And you may want to move on to a different area of exploration. And you're throwing it at me, and I just want to keep throwing it right back at you, Alex Harsley. But this is what, Coleman, I'm just going to throw it right back at you because, man, Harsley, but this is what made you. This is what made you, Coleman. That was my education. But the thing is, you can't be there all the time. You can't be in that position all the time. That would be as deadening for me as it would be for a photographer to be doing in the same place all the time. Harsley, you've expanded in one direction. What about all the other directions? Coleman, yeah, my life is a process of making choices, of cutting off alternatives, and of living with your choices, and that's just what I've done. There have been directions which I can go. I could have gone in the direction of maybe, after the voice thing, let's say, starting my own newsletter. Harsley, why didn't you, Coleman? Because at that particular juncture in my life, for a lot of personal and private reasons as well as professional reasons, it just didn't seem to me to be a right move. I didn't think I had the energy for it. I certainly didn't have the finances for it. I didn't feel at that point in my life like going out and making myself financially incumbent to anybody else in order to get the finances for it. I didn't think that I had the kind of stamina that it took at that particular point. I was coming off things in my private life, disruptions in my private life, some major changes. I didn't feel at that point I had the stamina to put into doing a thing like that, which in the beginning is a full-time thing, and I've edited newspapers and magazines. I know where the fuck that's at. That's a lot of energy, Harsley. You have all the necessary training to do it, though, Coleman, but I may not want to do that right now, man. Now, where the fuck is my freedom, Alex? That's what I'm asking you. Harsley, well, would you say you're copping out then? Coleman, no, I would not say I'm copping out. Are you going to accuse me of copping out? I wrote, during the time that I was writing for The Voice, I wrote an average of about 60 to 70 articles per year. I covered more fucking stuff, man, just in terms of space, linear output, forgetting the quality, which I was very proud of also, but just in terms of space. I wrote more during that period, I think, than probably any previous writer in the history of photographic criticism. Don't tell me I'm copping out if I'm suddenly lightening my load. Harsley, every school, in fact, Eastman Kodak, should give you a gold placard. Coleman, I don't want fucking gold placards. I want the right to take a break if I need a break. Harsley, they should give you a gold placard. Coleman, I'm entitled to a period because I feel also that, man, Harsley, you say take a break, for instance. Okay, if you're going to take a break, you're going to take a break. You don't become specialized in one area of thinking. It seems as though you become very specialized in a specific area of thinking without really realizing it. The extent of your thinking, I mean, literally, because with our last meeting, you said, well, I'm going to see if I can integrate my writings into what I will be writing, mainly the New York Times, camera magazines, and what have you. But if a person was to carefully analyze the type of writings that you were doing in The Voice in comparison to the difference between the two, Coleman, I don't really know that there would be that much of a vast difference between what I'm writing for popular photography and what I wrote for The Voice. Harsley, because The Voice is the difference between going to the Whitney Museum to look at art and going to the Museum of Modern Art to look at art. Coleman, you're saying The Voice is the Whitney Museum? Harsley, right. You know, the different kinds of art that they do, you know, the things they put on the wall. Coleman, yeah, there's a reason for that. They've got different audiences. Harsley, but the audiences are still there, though. Coleman, the thing is, I'm read by different people in popular photography than those who read me in Camera 35. Harsley, why are you read by a specific audience then? Coleman, there are many people who read me in all three. Harsley, you say specific audiences now. These are audiences that have been created, right? Coleman, I'm not sure you know what I know what you mean. Harsley, these are audiences that have been created. You say specific audiences. Coleman, they haven't been created by me. You say created by me. The audience of popular photography was there before I came. They're an audience that when I write a review of Joseph Karge, I get letters on toilet paper. That's the audience of popular photography. So that's the bulk of the audience of popular photography. I literally get people calling for my head on a plate because I said that Joseph Karge is trapped by his technique. Harsley, but that's such a small area though. Coleman, that's not such a small, Harsley. It's a small responsive area. There's other audiences there that they pick up, buy the magazine, and read it religiously. Coleman, Alex, what you're saying is that I'm not, at this present point, serving your needs as a member of the New York photographic community, let's say this specifically local photographic community to the best extent or to the extent that I once was, and I say that's true, and I'm not denying it in any way. But what I'm saying is that given the outlets with which I am now working, two of which are national outlets, Popular Photography and Camera 35, not just local, one of which is local with certainly national implications. Implications may be the wrong word, but you know what I mean, that extends towards that. The Voice was a local paper, a very appropriate place to emphasize the local scene. Harsley, The Voice is not a local paper. Coleman, yes it is, much more local than any of these three others. Harsley, it's not local. Coleman, granted, it goes around. It's still a paper which considers itself, its main function, not to be a paper of record, but a paper covering the local scene and especially the offbeat in the local scene. Nobody at The Voice told me I had to what I had to cover, that they felt that they had to have a review of some show at the Metropolitan, for example, because after all, there's a show at the Metropolitan. Harsley, The Voice goes to the major art centers in the world. Coleman, that's all true, but man, there's a lot of different types of magazines. There's Art in America, there's Avalanche. Harsley, those are definite, categorized. Coleman, if I was writing for Avalanche, I could write for a different kind of thing as I would for Art in America. Harsley, these are categorized, special inter-areas. I mean, definite. Art in America, how many people go out and spend $1.50 for Art in America? Coleman, a lot of people. They have a lot of subscribers, not as big a circulation as The Voice. Harsley, what level though? What level of the culture economically? Coleman, economically probably pretty high, but I guess, for example, that there's a pretty fair correlation between readers of Art in America and readers of The Voice art pages. Harsley, mainly in the commercial industry. Coleman, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a reader profile. Harsley, as a guide. Coleman, I can't really say. What I'm saying, man, you're throwing it on me, and I throw it right back. Personally, I need a period for private purposes. I need a period of less work. Point blank, less work. Across the board, less work. Harsley, because I get material in from all over the country. Coleman, I ran myself ragged for 5 years. I wore myself to a fucking frazzle. And I wrote 60 to 70 articles a year. That's an incredible output, man. Any way you slice it, that's an incredible output. And if I want to take a year's break, take a year off, I don't feel you've got any right to tell me I'm copping out. I really feel that you're off the wall when you say that. I think that if you consider it, you'll feel the same way. I did as much as I could during that period. I did more in terms of coverage for everything that was happening in the New York photographic community than had ever been done before. And I'm not going to relinquish that, of which I'm very proud, because to be continued.
Thank you.